Welcome to the Historic Preservation Commission meeting of February 18th, 2016. May I have a roll call, please?
Sure. Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
Commissioner Shire?
Here.
Commissioner Vartanian?
Here.
And Commissioner Vidor?
Here.
Thank you, all for presence.
Okay. The agenda for this meeting was posted on or before Monday, February 15th, 2016 on the bulletin board outside of City Hall. We'll now do the approval of the minutes. So if anyone has any additions or corrections, please.
I have none.
None? I just have one. It's a little bit minor, but just for clarification, to spell out the name of the film, Visual Acoustics, The Modernism of Julia Schulman, so people don't think we were doing movies about sound or something. You know, just
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Take care of
Do
that.
I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Vartanian?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Commissioner Shire?
Yes.
Madam Chair Vidor?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion to approve the minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Oral communications. Do we have any oral communications today? Doesn't look like we have any cards, so we can go on to comments from commissioners. Any comments? Oh, is this an oral communication? No. Okay. Comments from commissioners? No?
None.
I just have the same thing that I mentioned last month. I would like to encourage the mayor to find somebody for the vacant seat on the Historic Preservation Commission. I did talk to him the other day, and he said he had somebody in mind, but I don't know whether he's approached staff or not on it. I'm seeing no on it, but I would encourage him and the Glendale Historical Society to encourage him to fill the seat.
Thank you. Can I ask a question about that?
You certainly may.
Okay. Are there any applications in? Are we waiting for a choice to be made, or are we waiting for some feasible candidates to show up?
Last I knew, and this is probably from our last meeting, was that we are still waiting for some feasible candidates. I'm not sure that there's actually applications on file.
I see. Okay. Thank you. Okay. We have no old business, so we'll proceed on to new business, which is the advisory design review proposed construction of a Beeline administration building adjacent to the railway depot. So,
Okay.
Miss?
Yes, thank you, Chair Vidor. This presentation, as you mentioned, is an advisory review by the Preservation Commission. By way of background, what we were talking about is a transit operations facility that will be located adjacent to the historic Glendale Transportation Center, the old Southern Pacific Union Pacific Depot, as it was originally built. The proposed project does not in any way touch the historic depot, but it is in close proximity. And following practice that the Commission has had with other improvements related to transportation in that area, your input is desired from the standpoint particularly of ensuring that the proposed construction is not going to jeopardize the historic depot's ongoing status as a National Register property. And then any other design comments that you would have that might reflect a higher degree of compatibility of the proposed structure relative to the historic National Register building is also welcome, although you are not in the approving body of that particular project. So just to remind you, the most recent project reviewed in this fashion in the area of the transit center and the train station is the CNG facility that's in the parking lot and between Gardenia Avenue and the historic depot. We'll recall that was a couple of years ago we looked at that. And then prior to that, which may predate all the current commissioners' tenure on the commission, the HPC reviewed actually the roundabout and the kind of trellis work that actually frames the viewpoint to the main entrance as you come off of Gardenia. It's sort of an extension of Cerritos Avenue. So there's kind of two other occasions in recent memory in which the Commission has weighed in on improvements on the property. The property, of course, is all owned and operated by the city for the purposes of transportation. So this proposed project is a much-needed improvement to the operations of the Beeline bus fleet. Right now, the applicant team can go into greater detail if necessary. But right now, the Beeline bus fleet, the maintenance yard for it is actually a rented facility that is completely inadequate for the operation of the buses. If you've ever been in the building, they basically squeeze buses in, and it sort of looks like a game of Tetris as they try and get the buses in and out to the facility to operate it. That facility is also operated or leased and kind of controlled by MV Transit, which operates the transit system on behalf of the city under a contract. It's pretty typical for small-scale cities, which means that MV Transit in some ways has a monopoly on being able to compete for those kinds of contracts because there are no other comparable facilities around for other operators to be able to get in. So by building a new facility that the city owns that then can be utilized by different operators, it'll greatly enhance the efficiency and long-term viability of the Beeline system. And of course, as part of that is a desire to sort of provide for additional capacity for additional buses so that as the Beeline facility or Beeline operation may expand, and there's a great deal of interest in that on the council level, there's the room to do it, whereas right now we're pretty constrained in our ability to sort of cram more buses into the current facility. So this is a project that has been long anticipated. It's been talked about since I came to the city almost 10 years ago. It's been in the works, so we're finally in a position where we can pursue this project. And so it is now in a place where we have a site plan and some preliminary designs for the facility, and we'll be in front of you for your input. So, again, we're looking for the Commission's concurrence, as you'll see in the staff report, that because the proposed project in no way addresses or touches the historic depot, it does not endanger the depot's ongoing eligibility for as a National Register property. And then, as I said, we're looking for any sort of input you might have on the design that would be ultimately taken to the Director of Community Development, who will sort of ultimately probably be the final approving body, although actually the appropriations of sort of moving forward with this from a funding standpoint and appropriating a contract to actually build the building will be done by the City Council. So you can imagine if the City Council has comments about the design, they will certainly air them. So in effect, the City Council will end up being the final kind of design approval in their capacity to basically sort of authorize the funding for the project and the construction contracts. So I'm going to turn the presentation over to the lead architect from R&L, Pat McKelvey. But before Pat comes up, I do want to acknowledge a couple of people from the city team. First and foremost would be Catherine Engel, our transit manager, Rudy Lafore, who's serving as our kind of project manager on this and keeping us on track schedule-wise. And then Hagip Kasabian from project management out of the engineering division is also part of the team. So they're kind of the core project team. They won't be making a presentation, but they can answer any sort of detailed questions that Pat can address, and Laura from his office. So with that, unless the Commission has any questions for staff, I'll turn it over to Pat to take you through his presentation.
One quick question. So when you indicated, obviously, we're just advisory, but it won't go through design review at all? It'll go straight through City Council?
Well, in this particular part of the city, the Design Review Board is the design authority, except for development or buildings that are under 10,000 square feet or less, which this project actually falls under that threshold. In that case, then city staff is the design review authority. So the final signature would actually probably come from the Director of Community Development. Is pretty typical. It's called administrative design review, and we administer that throughout the city. But in this particular area, in development under 10,000 square feet can be reviewed at a staff level. But as I said, given that ultimately the approval of a contract to build the facility is going to have to be executed by the City Council, insofar as they may have opinions about the design that they would like to air, in effect, the City Council is the final authority, because I suppose if they didn't like the project, they could say, we're not approving this unless you make certain changes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Is the microphone on? Can't tell. Oop,
Yes.
it is. Sorry about that. So, good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you the Glendale Beeline Maintenance Facility Project. I'm Pat McKelvey, principal of R&L. Also with me is Laura Steele with R&L, the project architect. And so we're both here to answer any questions you may have as we go through the presentation. First of all, really appreciate the time that you all invested to meet with Laura and Catherine at the site and give us your input into the previous design that was proposed. And I just want to let you know that that feedback was well taken from our side. We've taken some additional alternatives, which I'll show you in this presentation. So bear in mind, I think we've listened, we've heard your input, and carried some things forward. Just as a kind of an introduction to the project, it's all in the package in front of you, but there's some additional slides that are now in the package in front of you. The existing facility, as you very well know, I'll go back here, framed off from Gardena itself, and then as we go in is the piece of property to the back is where the facility is proposed to be placed. Adjacent to that is, you'll notice, is an existing warehouse or commercial building that's adjacent property. And this is another look at that adjacent property, the CNG canopy, and an existing parking lot that is on what is now the south side of the depot. So a little bit about the Beeline maintenance facility. Consists of really three major components. One is the city administration, and it's administering the operations of the contractor, as Alan mentioned earlier. So that's really all about public service. It's about administering that contract and watching over the overall operation. Then there's the operator itself, who would have offices, dispatch, those types of elements. Their critical role is to get these buses out onto the street and service the constituents of Glendale. And then the third major component is maintenance and servicing, which would occur in the very back of the site. Their job is to make sure the buses do get on the street. So it's a pretty critical, tied-together operations. As I mentioned, there's a couple of key things related to the placement of the administration operations building. One, there's a public function. It's customer service. This is where people will come if they get off the train or drive into the site to get their bus passes. It's also lost and found. You happen to leave your cell phone on the bus, this is a place you're going to go to try to retrieve that. Any complaints or the other side of the opposite of complaints, awards that people may have related to the service of the buses. The other significant and major component of the location of the facility is the operations, the actual bus drivers, the dispatch. That's the element that needs direct and visual as well as physical access to the bus parking itself. So those elements are pretty specific and very tightly tied together. And then the third element is administration. We need to actually physically separate the city administration from the operator. The operator right now is an outside contractor, completely different staff, so we need to have a secure separation between those two. And there's also the potential of a secondary EOC or community room in this facility. So that's why we're definitely looking at a two-story building, not only from a constrained site, it's a very tight site right now, but also there's a physical separation that needs to happen. The plan itself is that the administration operations building would be placed in the location of that earlier photograph of the parking lot between the existing end of the depot and the adjacent commercial building. This would be a two-story building. The parking that is here and the necessary physically challenged parking would actually be moved up in this location and additional handicap spaces provided. The organization of the building itself on the ground floor, here's that public access element. There's the public lobby, so it has very good access directly to the depot, and there's the customer service function. The rest of the ground floor is that contractor operations unit, as I mentioned, offices, driver's area, and then these dispatch functions that really need direct access, visual as well as physical, to the yard itself. Upstairs would be the city administration offices in these locations. And then, like as I mentioned, a conference room that's going to be available as maybe a secondary EOC, Emergency Operations Center, in the event that we have one of those things in Southern California. So now our overall design approach was to try to be sensitive to the existing depot, set as far back as we could, but also think in terms of the scale. It's going to be a two-story building, but how does that 2 stories relate to the existing depot? First of all, we're trying not to get over the height of the existing building. We stayed below that as much as possible. We've set up a rhythm that's already existing with the column placement of the existing depot and set up that rhythm across the site and pick that up in the rhythm of the actual new building itself. The other element that we had in the original design, and we've got some options that we're going to show you, was that we had a high canopy for shading of the second floor, but also photovoltaic panels, which is definitely a desired element on this project. And we had a lower canopy that matched up in height to the existing canopy. That's one of those comments of the staff report that we've addressed, concern that was expressed. I just go ahead to a sequence of 3D visuals that's in your package. So this is obviously looking straight on to the existing depot, the new building on the left, and then actually over to the left even further is the existing canopy of the CNG fueling facility. As we get in closer, you start to see the new building on to the left through the landscaping. And then as we get closer to the depot itself, we see the building again to the left. And maybe this would be a better one to highlight. This would be the public entry to the facility. This is where people could come directly from the depot to ticket sales, to customer service if that was needed. And then as we move around the building, we've got a landscaped courtyard area. So off the end of the depot, instead of it just being the parking lot as it is today, this would now be a landscape transition from the end of the depot to the entry of the new building. It's going to come around to various aspects of the project. On the back side of the building, obviously the rail tracks here, there would be able to be a landscaped area for the employees of the admin operations building. Right now it's kind of no man's land. Again, part of that parking lot that's there today. And then one last shot, again, of around to the back side of that, again, landscape courtyard area with the lower canopy and then the higher canopy. So that's what you saw before, and that's what you looked at when you walked around the site with Catherine and with Laura. So there were a number of, this is the material palette. I don't know if we need to go into that, or maybe we could come back to that if that would be helpful. Just to summarize a few things from the staff report, there were a number of items noted as possibilities to address some of the concerns. One was to relocate the building itself. So I'll talk about some options there and some issues, very significant issues with that. The possibility of reducing the projection of that lower canopy, pull it back from further away from the depot itself. One was to actually remove that lower canopy and create a larger landscape buffer, which is actually one of the directions that we would prefer to go. And I'll show that to you. Another was to eliminate the canopies altogether, and I'll show you that and why we don't really want to do that, but I'll show it to you. And then the last one was to lower the height of the tall canopy itself. So let's talk about the relocation aspect. We took an approach to look at the possibility of rotating the building itself 90 degrees. This particular version, and I'll pop back and forth, this version moved it closer to the CNG canopy, and this version left it kind of in that same corner that we have it now. A couple of issues with that. First of all, the public entry now becomes further disconnected from the depot, and I think from a urban design standpoint, that's not preferred. We could move it a little bit closer, but it can't get much further towards the tracks than about the middle of the building. Probably one of the major negative points about this is the need for operations to really have direct visual as well as physical control over the bus parking yard itself. So this moves them further away, and it becomes a bigger issue in terms of the operations of the facility itself. And probably the third thing is we end up with this kind of separated parking lot down here, kind of like your current situation. But, you know, if you just imagine yourself pulling in here, because I know there's some parking over here, but you get there and it's all taken up. Now you got to turn around and get back out and try to find another parking place. I just think it's quite awkward from that standpoint. If we move the building further towards the tracks, many of those same issues, the operational side's a bit better, but still the public entry and the separated parking is an issue, we think. So from our perspective, we think the location of the building in its original location is the right thing to do. It's the best from an operational standpoint. It's best from a public access. And I think it's really best from the standpoint of creating a nice courtyard between the depot and the new building. So if we move on to the issues about canopy, the first thing that we did was to look at the possibility of eliminating that lower canopy altogether. And I think you'll see in our final preferred approach, that's exactly what we've done. We think that lower canopy can go away, and we really greatly enhance the landscaping between the end of the depot and the new building. It makes a nice transition point there. And also, maybe I'll go back if you don't mind. That would be located essentially here, and this is exactly where people exit and enter off the platform. So from a pedestrian circulation standpoint, it's a great place to have a nice courtyard where people can wait to then cross the platform to board a train. Another nice little added feature. The next approach was, what if we just got rid of the canopy altogether? And I think from a design standpoint, this actually seems like it's even a taller building and actually has a more impact on the visual impact on the depot itself. So we definitely don't want to go that direction. A third approach was to take that canopy from the very top of the building, which is providing shading to the second floor, and drop it down to the level of the top of the first floor. Again, from a massing standpoint, we feel like it's still overpowering even more so the existing depot. So what we looked at was an approach where we bring the canopy down to the top of the second floor windows, which again, I think it now starts to feel better. It starts to pull it down to a height that's more like the top of the main structure of the depot. Reduces that scale. We eliminate the. Sorry, went too fast here. Too fast. We eliminate that lower canopy and enhance the landscaping between the two. And another element that we looked at was to actually pull the structure of the canopy in. And it starts to pick up a detail that's already there in the depot itself with an overhang and column setback at the end of the canopy on the depot. So let me just walk you, again, around the building in a similar manner, and then we can open up for some discussion. So this is just a quick comparison of the four approaches, and I think hopefully you would agree that the massing of these gets quite a bit reduced with the bringing that canopy down partway, but not bringing it way down, and still serves the purpose of shading, photovoltaics, and the like. So just to walk around and give that same view. As we come around, you'll see a greatly enhanced landscape zone between the end of the depot and the existing building. The kind of the detailing that's here of the column set back from the edge of the canopy starts to get picked up in this location and around the building, so it starts to get tied together, but not be mimicking or overpowering from a standpoint. Come around the building. Again, on the back side, again, all the same functional elements are still there. We're just bringing that scale down. and then ending up with a view of the courtyard, as I mentioned. Where this shadow person is exactly where they're going to be walking off the platform. So you've got this nice potential courtyard between there that actually bring them into the parking area. Take you back around to the final view. So with that, that's kind of the end of the formal presentation part of it. With that, I'd like to turn it back or maybe, I don't know, turn it back to Madam Chairman or back to Alan, I'm not sure.
We do have another speaker card. Would we take the speaker now, or?
At your pleasure, if you may, if you don't mind. Very briefly, from staff's perspective, we managed to review these alternatives earlier this week, and from staff's perspective, Jay Platt and myself, we believe that any of these alternatives are acceptable in terms of evaluating the historic depot's ongoing eligibility as a national register. None of these alternatives will compromise the national register status. So the various alternatives are really about kind of a higher degree of design compatibility from staff's perspective. So, just
from staff's perspective, which best addresses staff's concern in the report?
We helped arrive at the final design that Pat presented. Staff actually feels that actually addresses most of the concerns. It best addresses the range of concerns that we had.
Is this courtyard that you see in the last drawing here, which looks like a little orchard actually?
Yes.
And is that going to have any? It's pretty, but will there be any utilitarian purpose to it, with people being able to congregate in it? Is it a little park, or is it really a massive trees to block the building?
Good question. We haven't really gotten into a detailed design of that courtyard, but we really felt like bringing in some of the citrus trees would be a great idea, given the historical context of the train depot itself and a lot of the activities that seemed to happen here years ago. I wasn't here at the time, but we understand that those have happened. I believe that it would be safe to say that in this zone particularly, because this is part of that circulation path from the platform out to the parking, if a person is going that particular direction, and there's already some benches there, that we would really like to enhance that as a waiting area under the shade next to an orange tree or a lemon tree or whatever it's going to be. But the detail of that design we haven't flushed out just quite yet.
I have a question on an observation or comment that was made by the Glendale Historical Society regarding the overall height of the building. Has that changed? I'm guessing not. And from 29 feet.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. Let me just pop back, if I may, to maybe this view is probably the best view. Right now we have established that the floor height is 14 feet, and that's for a typical office, and it is allowing us structural depth and allowing air conditioning, ductwork, and piping and sprinklers and all that stuff to run underneath of it. And then still have a 9-foot ceiling in the offices and operation areas. We are evaluating now whether we could bring that down a little bit. We hope that we might be able to get maybe a foot per floor. We take it from 14 to 13, but I can't promise it right now, standing here in front of you. I'll just be honest with you. But that's what we're assessing, whether we can actually bring the height of the building down a little bit. That'll certainly help quite a bit in terms of the overall massing. Certainly, if we don't need to build the extra height, we're not going to build it.
And so that would be mostly just because I think you have a mechanical penthouse in the back corner in the south.
Yes, on the second floor.
So that would mostly be for duct work in between the floors? And
correct. Yeah, so from floor, you have the structure of the slab itself, then the supporting structure, then there's a zone for mechanical ductwork, for sprinkler piping, all that before we get to the ceiling. That zone we're trying to squeeze as much as possible, but still be efficient. I mean, we've got a limited budget on the project, and we've got to not be increasing costs by penetrating beams with ductwork and that sort of thing. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, You don't see it because, again, it would be behind the parapet, so from the ground level you won't see it. The intent is that not only is there photovoltaic on the canopy itself, but also an array on the building, on top of the building, but behind the parapet. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Why don't we take our speaker, Catherine Jurka. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Catherine Yurka, and I'm here on behalf of the Glendale Historical Society. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the proposed Beeline building. And we wish in particular to thank Catherine Engel, not only for reaching out to us about the project and for sharing plans, but also for her obvious, sincere interest in protecting the historic depot. We submitted formal comments to the commissioners, as well as to Catherine, and don't have a lot to add to what we said in the letter. We would like to reiterate that bringing the transit building's total height down would do a great deal to help reduce the obvious massiveness of this building in relation to the depot. We consulted with 2 architects who had copies of the plans, and they agreed that it could come down by 5 feet and still leave at least 8-foot ceilings inside, which is more than enough for an office building. Also, moving it as far as possible to the southeast, that was, again, a recommendation, and away from the National Register property boundaries, at the very least, would further help to prevent it from visually overwhelming the depot. We noticed that there is room for 60 parking spots. Glendale has a fleet of 37. While I can understand that there might be reason to allow for room to grow in the fleet, it also seems that anything that could move the building farther away would help it not to visually overwhelm it. Also, both of these changes would help to bring the project into compliance with the standards, which direct that new work, including a brand new building, quote, shall be compatible with the massing, size, and scale to protect the historic integrity of the property and its environment. We like the idea of landscaping and fruit trees very much, but landscaping does not count as mitigation for incompatible construction. The only other thing that we'd point out is that when the California State Office of Historic Preservation concurred with a federal transit finding that the proposed new building would not have an adverse effect on the depot, it did so not only in the absence of a design, but on the condition that the HPC reviewed the project, quote, to ensure that all aspects of the new building will not impact the depot and that all public lines of sight are maintained. Given that review is stipulated in the staff report as a condition for SHPO's concurrence, we don't understand in what sense the HPC's review of this project can be considered advisory, as it's described on the agenda, and we'd be grateful for clarification about what the role of the HPC in this process is. Thanks very much.
Mr. Loomis, can you comment on
Yes.
the advisory role
Absolutely.
of the commission?
The city's zoning code identifies who has which bodies have design review authority to approve projects of particular scales around the entire city. So, as you well know, in historic districts, the HPC is the design review authority for work, regardless of whether it is on a contributing building to a historic district or a non-contributing building or a brand new building within a historic district. In the downtown specific plan area, the City Council is the design review authority. Outside of the downtown specific plan and historic districts, the Design Review Board has design review authority across the city. The exception to that is for development in commercial or mixed-use district zoning, which the site is in a mixed-use zone. Then in those areas, projects or development under 10,000 square feet can be reviewed by city staff. And that, in effect, is design review staff and planning staff making determinations that are then signed by the Director of Community Development. So the zoning code outlines who has the design review authority. So in this case, as I said, Design Review Authority would rest either with the Design Review Board, or if for development such as this under 10,000 square feet, could be executed by city staff. So in that sense, the code says who has the review authority. And as part of the environmental documentation that we did with SHPO and with the FTA for this particular project, one of the stipulations was that your review would ensure that we are not jeopardizing the National Register status of the existing building. So in effect, your review is kind of a mitigation, if you will, given that when the application was submitted to the FTA, there wasn't a detailed design. So hopefully that clarifies it.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just have one more question for Mr. Pat. So I know I already asked about the height of the building
Yes.
based on the comments by the Historical Society, and now I'm hearing that 2 other architects have been consulted and made a comment that they feel the building could come down easily 5 feet. Could you
Sure.
respond to that
Glad to respond to that.
suggestion by other architects?
First of all, 2 of those 5 feet is the difference in the floor to ceiling height. So we're proposing a 9-foot ceiling height, which is typical of office space, whether it's in the city or any place else. It's typical height. That's probably actually a little bit less than the ceiling height in here. And given the floor plan, if you bear with me, I'll go back to the floor plan of the building. We have a couple of rather large spaces that, in essence, pretty much demand a larger floor-to-ceiling height. They're big spaces. The first one being the driver's room. So this is a large open room where all of the drivers come in the morning, get their assignments. They're, dropping off their stuff in their little locker, and they're headed off to their bus. So this is a lot of activity. It's a large open space, and it's a lot of activity going on at a particular time. So it needs to be big. It needs to have volume of space for people to do their thing. Certainly, yes, I would agree. If it was just a whole series of small offices, that ceiling height could come down to 8 feet, probably feel okay. But 9 feet we really need as kind of a minimum. Actually, I'd like to have this more around 10 feet. Floor to sit, which is pretty much what this is, just so you have more volume of space. On the second floor, we have a similar kind of room. That is the training room. It'll be, again, a large training room about the size of this room for training of the operators, the buses, the mechanics, but also it's a room to be used by the city staff and other operational things throughout the day as needed. And as I mentioned, it might also be a secondary EOC for the city. That too needs a larger floor to floor or floor to ceiling height. So 2 of that 5 feet that they're mentioning, we're already looking at 2 feet. 2 feet I probably can't give you. So now we're going to argue about a foot, whether I can get another 6 inches floor to floor out of there. I don't know yet, but we'll do our best.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
One more question.
Oh, sure.
Just stick with one. And on the spatial difference between the terminating edge of the depot and now, let's say we have one canopy,
Yes.
as you suggest in your last alternative.
Yes.
So what does that make the space between the 2 facilities, canopy to canopy?
Okay. Let me give you a few dimensions. So from the edge of the existing canopy of the depot to this upper canopy, the one that would be at the top of the second floor, that distance is 25 feet from edge of canopy to edge of canopy. So now if we look at edge of building, the edge of building, that's anywhere between 50 to 55 feet because we have this little punch out here for the stair. So it's 50 feet to the stair, 55 feet building face to building face. Okay.
I have one more question.
Of course. I'm here all night.
Did you happen to see the letter from the Historical Society that talked about the National Register kind of plot and the area around the depot that was in the report?
Yeah, we understand.
New building now outside of that boundary?
The building face itself is, as I mentioned, depends on the information isn't specific as to the dimension of where that, they call it a property line. Actually, it's not a property line.
I call it a plot for
Yeah,
lack
it's
of a
not even
better
an
term.
official plot line as far as I understand it to be, but maybe it'd be helpful if Alan addressed that comment more specifically. But I'm not sure exactly where that line is, but that we were told to stay back from the existing face of building to face of building at least 50 feet, so which is what we've tried to do.
Okay. Are we ready to close the public hearing and start to comment on the project? I think we are. Does anyone want to start the comments? Don't all jump at the same time.
Well, I'm concerned about the building height, just like the Glendale Historical Society said, and you have two competing architects. So do we take, by whose word, the one from the Glendale Historical Society, the two from the Glendale Historical Society, or the actual designing architect itself? I would like him to, in good faith, to do obviously the best work he can do on it and make it, I would like the height to be lower. I like their proposal, but with a certain amount of money that you have for this thing, there's certain things that you cannot do. So I would wish that would be, I don't know who exactly to go with. I will presume, since you're actually working on the building, that you have the actual figures on it itself. I would like to be lower if it could. 29 feet. When you look at the height against the station itself, it's.
Go back to that slide.
If you can go back to it when you, back.
No, I'm getting to the slide. Too fast.
Actually, I was looking at the slide that has a comparison of the building to the actual
Elevation.
the elevation one. Yes.
That's the previous height of the canopy, okay?
Yeah, it's the elevations one. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Well, when you look at it, it does seem kind of massive against what looks like a very small station itself. If you could bring the height down, that would satisfy a lot of my concerns on it. The other part about moving the building, I know that they were talking about you only have 37 buses. Well, you only have 37 buses at this time. I presume that any business wants to grow, and you want the Beeline to go to different parts of Glendale than it does. So I think you've allocated for 60 buses, so I don't know if you could make the parking lot any smaller. I don't know what the plans are. Catherine Engel could probably tell us, what their designs are in the future. So, it would be nice to take the new administrative building and move it farther away, but within the constraints that you have. That's just my other major concern. The other one is, the Glendale Historical Society was saying that about the historic setting, and I would love it to still be in its historic setting, but I think when the Historic Preservation Commission came in 2008 and put the CNG station there, it kind of changed the whole historic setting itself. So I think that bird has flown, basically. But I do like, when Catherine mentioned it, and I still like it, I like the and I know this has nothing to do with the actual building itself. I like the last plan better than the earlier ones, and I do like the fact that you have an orange grove. So I know that's just me as being a historian for Glendale and what was there originally, and I would like back again. And this is the gateway. This is the real gateway for Glendale, and it would be nice for people coming in from Los Angeles to see what I like are the two buildings, the modern building juxtaposed with the historic station, and it just kind of makes it, it's a good transition. I think it's in the right place for the right reasons, and people coming in for the first time will see Glendale as a modern Glendale and a historic Glendale, and I think they work well together. But if I were to make a preliminary, I like the latest addition that you've done with the lowering of the canopy itself.
And I'd like to thank you first for showing us the various options and sort of the thought process that you've gone through in terms of looking at different ways to approach the building. I think that's very helpful to us. I think we generally recognize that you don't just put out your first drawing, but it's helpful for us to see the process that you go through as architects. And I'm wondering if I'm just going to put it out there, if that's something we could think about as we move forward when we have people bringing plans before us, to have various versions so we could kind of see, all that's been worked through before it gets here. I actually, I'm comfortable with the most current design. I appreciate bringing the canopy down, pulling back the columns. I think that's made a difference in sort of the overall massing. And I like the concept of the orange grove in between the two buildings and the added open space. On a different level, I mean, I know it's always hard to maintain any kind of landscaping, so I would hope if that grove goes in there that, those trees stay nice and they flourish well and they don't just dwindle down too. I'm sure Catherine will tend to them personally. Yeah, overall, I feel that I'm comfortable with the current designs, and has been said, and as I've asked twice, as much as you can lower the structure would be really terrific. Thank you for your work.
Well, I concur with my colleagues. First, I wanted to say thank you so much for the very thorough design package. It's always great to see so many elevations and renderings and perspectives, because it gives us kind of a good sense of how the two buildings interrelate. And I really appreciate you being willing to take the critiques and make changes. As a designer myself, I think sometimes the best work comes from critiques and figuring out a better way. So thank you for doing that. I think you've addressed many of my concerns in the alternate 4 as presented. In the earlier design, some of the perspectives almost looked like the depot building was touching the other canopy, just from a perspective. I know they weren't, but I think now with the landscaping in between and the elimination of the lower canopy, the drop of the higher canopy, I think all that really helps. The adding of the landscaping and plantings will soften kind of the separation between the two buildings, which I think is very nice. I would also just, again, challenge you as you go forward with the design to bring the height down as much as possible. I think I understand needing volume and space from the interior, but I think also if we can gain another 2 feet or 3 or whatever, that would be ideal from the exterior perspective and how they relate to each other. So with the alternate design 4, I think it's much improved design, and I would support it.
Thank you. Well, I'll also say thank you not only to all of you, Patrick, Catherine, Laura. Really do appreciate the amount of time you spent with us going over the plans, and it was really nice to have a package to review that didn't provoke a lot of questions or make one ask what's missing or why can't I find this. It was very comprehensive and easy for somebody who finds it difficult to read plans and look at renderings to look and evaluate. And I'd also like to thank the Glendale Historical Society and Catherine for providing us with community input as well. I pretty much agree with my colleagues also. I guess I kind of feel like the depot, being as historically significant and beautiful as it is the focal point for the transportation center. So, in addition to the idea of nothing encroaching upon it, no matter how many buildings crop up over the next few years, it should always be the place to where the eye is drawn. And I think the street, the way it is sited and the way the street runs into it with the landscaping and hardscaping elements in front really help the building. One thing that crossed my mind that I think is not a feasible solution now that I've heard all the discussion, but it still seems like I wish it would have been is to angle buildings away from it so that they're, here's the station, and then buildings are kind of moving back away from it, kind of, almost like the Royal Crescent or something. But anyway, I don't know if that's feasible. And I think that the last option that you proposed with the parapet on top, which I assume is there's going to be a lot of utilities up there, that if somebody were looking down from an airplane that they would see it, but no one else will, that it's, not those things are not viewable by anybody from any other. Yeah, okay. I think that's the nicest solution of those that were proposed, and that psychologically the lack of the lower canopy and just bringing down the eyebrow at the top will mitigate some of the height issues. This building is a really beautiful design, and to me it almost looks like new formalism, like like a little Lincoln Center. It's got this wonderful monumental verticality, which is very graceful, but that really does make you want to mitigate. And I think in addition to the proposal that you made and the really good faith effort to just slice a little bit off, that would be good. Looking at the parking lot and the comments made, I don't know whether that last row can be lopped off or whether you really need those 10 spaces, but if you can take one row of parking out and go down, that would be nice, but whether that's feasible or not is probably a question you've already discussed. I don't know. If you want to address anything else after we talk, I'm certainly willing to open up the public hearing, but those are my only comments, other than I think that landscaping here is really crucial because it's going to soften up everything, and I love the idea of trees, but there's also a thing that sometimes people do that creates a certain psychology with their homes. They make a barricade, and I don't think the building should look like it's being barricaded, like the two are being segregated from one another by a lot of trees. So if it's going to end up having that feel like, we put a nice little orchard here so these two buildings won't have to look at each other, or really that the old building won't have to look at the new building, then maybe there should be some rethinking of that. I don't know who the landscape contractor is, but I hope, that landscaping scheme is really brilliant and does whatever it can to soften up the building without creating the hedge factor.
Landscape architects.
You are? Okay. So I'm talking to him right now. Okay. I think that was all I had to say, too. So I think we have completed our comments.
Yes, unless there's any further comments from the commission. So as I said, this is an advisory review, so we're not looking for a vote. Formal vote from the commission, but just to sum up, all four commissioners would like the architect to make a good faith effort to continue to reduce the building height. All four commissioners prefer alternative 4, the most recent kind of design iteration, as a sort of preferred direction, and all four made comments about the desirability of the landscape that's being proposed. So we will continue to work with Pat and his team as the design evolves to sort of address those comments. And they should be reflected, I think, in the final project that would be approved. As I said, in this case, we're anticipating a city staff level approval, but that likely is not going to happen until after the council has an opportunity to sort of make whatever comments they would make. So we can also, the staff level approval can also reflect the council's input, and that will come some months from now. I'm looking at Rudy as our project manager. When do we anticipate being in front of City Council for approval on funding? Okay. So we'd be looking at being in front of the council probably in July. So stay tuned. Also, since, as I mentioned, we're looking for the commission's concurrence with staff that the proposed design does not affect the National Register status of the historic depot. And hearing no objections or comments from the commission on that, can we say that we have the commission's concurrence on staff's opinion there?
You have mine.
Yes.
Okay.
I do have one quick question, though. We're talking about the parking lot and the bus parking lot. I mean, is that in concrete? not to be pun intended. I mean, they can't move the building farther south at all, right? I mean, it's
Yeah, if you look at the site plan, what actually constrains it more than anything else is the existing tilt-up concrete warehouse that the city does not own. So you're trying to squeeze a, bus access between that building, which is fixed, and where the new structure would go. So you could certainly move the proposed administration building further towards southeast, sort of down track towards Los Angeles, but then there'd be no way of actually driving the buses into the bus yard, which sort of defeats the whole idea of the project. Yeah.
got to ask.
Well, I wanted to add one more thing that I forgot was just regarding the design finishes. I have no issue with them. They seem to be sensitive to the existing as well as, having it be its own building. So those seem fine to me.
Okay. Thank you for that additional comment.
I would concur. Okay, well, if that wraps it up, I'd like to thank all of you very, very much for your contributions, and we'll go on to item number 9, Planning Division updates and briefings.
I have one.
You have none?
I do. I'm happy to report that we are in the final stages of the designation process for the Neojara Drive Historic District. At your meeting, in an advisory capacity, at your meeting on January 21st, you voted unanimously in favor of a recommendation to City Council to create a historic district overlay zone. And then 2 weeks following that, at the Planning Commission meeting of February 3rd, they also voted unanimously in favor of the same, recognizing the unique beauty of the neighborhood. And we are tentatively anticipating that the City Council will have a hearing on this on March 29th. Tuesday, March 29th would be the introduction of the request. And then also tentatively the following week, April 5th, we will hopefully have the final vote on this process in our 7th Historic District.
Thank you very much. That's good news. Well, I will adjourn the meeting then. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.